I spent my entire life performing for other people. And it was not until right now, at 92 years old, that I finally realized the real cost of it all. When you are aging alone, the deep silence of an empty house forces you to face your biggest life regret. I look back at everything, and I just see the wasted years. Nobody prepares you for these end-of-life lessons. And nobody talks about how your mental health over 60 depends entirely on you finally stopping the lies you tell yourself. I stayed in a loveless, performative marriage for 44 years. I did not stay because I loved my husband. I stayed because divorce was considered shameful. I gave up a scholarship to nursing school at 22 because people said a married woman had no business leaving her home. I cut ties with my closest friend in the world in 1971 because she was considered too loud, and people in the neighborhood were starting to talk. I stayed in situations that hurt me deeply, and I silenced my own voice just to keep up an image for people who did not truly care about me. Today, my name is Agnes, and I am finally free. But the hard truth is that this freedom came way too late. Stay with me. I am going to tell you exactly where I went wrong. The root of all this started way before I even understood what was happening. I was born in Selma, Alabama in 1932. We were right in the middle of the Great Depression. I was one of 6 children in our small, crowded house. My father, Elias, worked long, brutal hours at a local sawmill. I remember the smell of sawdust and sweat that always clung to his clothes when he came home. He was a gentle and quiet man. He loved me, but he showed it mostly through his presence, just sitting nearby on the porch. He rarely used words to tell us how he felt. My mother, Mildred, was different. She took in laundry from other families to make ends meet. Her hands were always raw from the soap and the hot water. We were very poor. We did not have much to eat, and our shoes were always worn down to the soles. But we were respectable. That word, respectable, was used by my mother like it was a loaded weapon. It was the only armor she felt she had against a world that did not value us. Things got much harder for my mother and for all of us in 1944. My little brother Thomas got sick with a terrible fever. He was only 7 years old. We did not have the money for proper doctors, and the hospitals for black folks were full and understaffed. Thomas died in that bed. That was the loss our family never fully recovered from. His death changed my mother. It made her harder, more rigid, and much more controlling. She became obsessed with how we looked to the outside world because it was the only thing she could actually control. I remember one specific Sunday very clearly. It was a few years before Thomas died. I was 9 years old. I put on a dress to go to church, and it had a small tear near the hem. I wore it because we simply had nothing else for me to put on. We walked into the sanctuary, and an older woman in the congregation looked at me. She whispered loud enough for my mother and me to hear. She said that those children always looked like a mess. My mother did not say a single word in that church. She kept her head high and her face completely blank. But while we were walking home on the dirt road, she grabbed my arm. She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You never give them a reason to talk." That single sentence became the operating system for my entire life for the next 70 years. I absorbed that lesson into my bones. I made sure no one would ever have a reason to talk about me again. I became a bright student. I kept my head down, I did my work, and I finished at the very top of my class at the segregated East Side Colored School. I did everything exactly right. I watched my older brother, Elias Jr., move away to Chicago in 1952, just to get away from the heavy expectations in our house. We wrote letters for decades after that, and I always missed him. But I stayed. And because I did everything right, at age 21, I won a full scholarship to a nursing school up in Birmingham. It was my ticket out. It was my dream. I wanted to help people. I wanted to be something more than just a respectable girl waiting for a husband. The year was 1953. I literally had the scholarship letter in my hand. My bags were already half packed in my bedroom. I was ready to go. I had the train schedule memorized. But then, Harold Reeves proposed to me. Harold was a stable man. He went to church every Sunday. He had a steady job, and most importantly, my mother strongly approved of him. He looked good on paper. I remember sitting in the kitchen when my aunt looked at me across the table. She pointed her finger at me and said that a woman chasing a career is a woman nobody wants. I heard those words, and the old fear took over. The fear of being talked about. The fear of not being respectable. I let the fear of what people would think make the biggest decision of my life. I turned down the scholarship. I walked into my bedroom, looked at my half-packed bags, and I unpacked them. I folded my clothes and put them back in the drawer. I married Harold 3 months later, and I never spoke about the nursing school again. Not a single time. Not for 40 years. Our marriage was exactly what people expected it to be from the outside. But inside, it was entirely empty. It was not a cruel marriage. Harold did not hit me. He did not yell at me. But it was not a loving marriage either. It was a performance. It was a stage play that lasted for decades. Harold provided the money. I managed the home. I raised our children. I kept up all the appearances. We were extremely polite to each other whenever we were out in public, but we were almost entirely silent when we were alone in our house. We would sit at the dinner table, and the only sound would be our forks hitting the plates. He never actually knew that I had given up that scholarship to marry him. I never told him. I did not want to disturb the peace. I just swallowed my ambition and became Mrs. Reeves. Life went on, and the tragedies piled up quietly. My first daughter, Denise, was born in 1957. My son, Harry, came in 1961. And then, in 1965, I had another baby girl. We named her Gloria. She was born premature. She was so tiny, and her lungs were just not ready for this world. She lived for 4 short days. Harold and I never spoke of her publicly. We just buried her, and we buried the grief right along with her. I came home from the hospital, put my apron on, and started cooking dinner. The only place Gloria existed was inside the back cover of my Bible, where I wrote her name in blue ink. My brother Raymond died in Vietnam in 1969. That loss broke something in my family permanently, just like Thomas dying had broken my mother. My father had already passed away in 1968 from lung disease from his years breathing in dust at the sawmill. The people I loved were disappearing, and I was just standing there, smiling politely for the neighbors. It was during these years that I started keeping a private journal. I started writing in 1962, and I kept doing it for 44 years, right up until 2006. I have boxes of them hidden under my bed. No one has ever read a single page of them. In those notebooks, I was opinionated. I was funny. I was sometimes incredibly bitter. And I was so profoundly lonely. That journal was the only place I was allowed to be angry. To the rest of the world, I was just Agnes, dignified, composed, the model churchwoman. But Harold was not my biggest regret. The hardest thing I have to live with is what I did to my best friend, Ruth Elaine Mosley. Ruth and I had been best friends since we were 14 years old. She was the only person in the entire world with whom I could be completely, entirely myself. I didn't have to perform for Ruth. We would sit on the porch for hours and just laugh. She knew my secrets. But in 1971, Ruth made a decision that changed everything. She was deeply unhappy in her marriage, so she left her husband. She moved into an apartment all by herself, and she started speaking her mind out loud in public. She spoke up at church meetings. She spoke up at community gatherings. She didn't care who heard her or what they thought. She was finally living her truth. People started to talk. They called her scandalous. They said she was ruined. They whispered about her in the aisles of the grocery store and in the pews at church. And I became absolutely terrified that I would be associated with a woman like that. I was so scared that their gossip would spill over onto my pristine, respectable life. So, I did the worst thing I have ever done. I slowly pulled away from her. I stopped returning her phone calls. When I saw her walking down the street, I would cross to the other side. If I bumped into her at the store, I would pretend I was in a rush and cut the conversation short. I told myself it was her own fault for being so reckless and loud. I convinced myself I was doing the right thing for my family's reputation. Ruth and I never reconciled. The years passed. Ruth died of breast cancer in 1989. She died completely alone in a hospital room over in Memphis. I didn't even know she was sick. I only found out she had passed away 3 weeks after her funeral from a mutual acquaintance at the grocery store. That is the one thing I cannot forgive myself for. Not Harold, not the nursing school, Ruth. I let my best friend die alone because I was worried about what a bunch of hypocrites in my neighborhood might whisper about me. My mother, Mildred, died of a stroke in 1979. I did not grieve easily when she passed. The guilt of that lack of grief stayed with me for years. It wasn't until 1988, when I was standing at our mother's grave with my younger sister Vera, that I finally spoke about the past. Vera was the sister I was closest to as an adult. We were standing there looking at the headstone, and for some reason the words just fell out of my mouth. I told Vera about the nursing school scholarship. I told her I had the letter, that my bags were packed, and that I stayed because of what people would say. Vera just looked at me. Her eyes filled with tears, and she said, "Lord, Agnes, why didn't you go?" I stood there in the cemetery, and I had absolutely no answer for her. Vera died in 2015, and I still think about that conversation. Harold died in 1997. It was a sudden heart attack. He died sitting right in his brown armchair in the living room, watching the evening news, while I was washing dishes in the kitchen. I heard a strange noise, walked in, and he was gone. The very last real conversation we had before he died was an argument about repainting the living room walls. He wanted to paint them beige. I wanted a deep, rich green. Because I always gave in to keep the peace, we painted them beige. Exactly 6 weeks after his funeral, I bought a can of paint and I painted those walls green. They are still green today, and I sit in front of them every single morning while I drink my coffee. At Harold's funeral, I cried. The tears were real. I sobbed in the front pew. But if I am being completely honest with you, I was never entirely sure what I was crying for. Was I crying for him, or was I crying for the 44 years of my life that were just gone? I didn't know how to be anything other than a wife and a mother, and suddenly the house was empty. I kept going through the motions. For 22 years, I was the head of the hospitality committee at the Greater Hope Missionary Baptist Church here in Atlanta. I have been a member there for 41 years. I was famous for my pound cake. Whenever there was a funeral or a church picnic, they called me. I was the dignified, composed churchwoman. I always said yes when I really wanted to say no. I smiled warmly when I was hurting deeply inside. I never, ever caused a scene. I just kept performing. The moment everything finally broke open did not happen at a funeral or a dramatic family gathering. It happened on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. The year was 2006. I was 74 years old. I was completely alone in my house, cleaning out some old boxes in the hallway closet. I was going through papers, deciding what to throw away. I reached into a dusty box, and my fingers brushed against a piece of heavy old paper. I pulled it out into the light. It was the original scholarship letter from the nursing school in Birmingham from 1952. I had kept it. I kept that letter for more than 50 years. I honestly do not know why I didn't throw it away when I unpacked my bags. Maybe I knew, somewhere deep down in my soul, that one day I would need to look at it and finally grieve what I had done to myself. I stood there in the dim light of the hallway and read the words on that page. The ink was faded, but the promise was still there. And then my legs just gave out. I sank down onto the hardwood floor, and I stayed there for hours. I sat in the dust, holding that piece of paper, and I cried until I couldn't breathe. Sitting on that floor, the whole truth finally hit me. I realized that I was never actually afraid of what people thought about me. I was afraid of what I would have to face about myself if I stopped caring. I realized that all my sacrifices were entirely useless. My biggest fear was true. I had wasted my entire life, and the people I sacrificed it for never even noticed. My mother never knew what I gave up. Harold never knew. The neighbors who gossiped about Ruth certainly didn't care about my respectable life. They were too busy with their own miserable lives. I had built a prison out of other people's opinions, and I had handed them the key. I locked myself inside and threw my own life away. That realization, sitting on that hallway floor, changed everything about how I lived the time I have left. I stopped caring that day. I am 92 now, and I see the echoes of my mistakes in my own family. I have a daughter, Denise. She is 67 years old, a retired school principal. She calls me every single day. She is anxious, she is tired, and she is always trying to manage my life for my own good. She constantly pushes me to sell my home and move into an assisted living facility. Her husband, Marcus, agrees with her, but I refuse. I love my small, tidy two-bedroom house in southwest Atlanta. I have been here for 38 years, and I am not leaving. The problem with Denise is that she is exactly what I raised her to be. She is terrified of appearances. She wants to do everything perfectly right. I see my own mistakes reflected in her anxiety, and I realize it is my fault she is so stressed. I just don't know how to tell her that without breaking her heart. I love her, but I find her exhausting. My son Harry is 63. He is an insurance broker, and he lives up in Charlotte, North Carolina, with his wife, Patricia. He visits me twice a year. We have a functional relationship, but we are not close. Harry is very much his father's son. He is practical, very private, and totally uncomfortable with any kind of emotion. I tried to tell him about my nursing school scholarship once, years ago. I thought maybe he would understand. He just looked down at his shoes and immediately changed the subject. I never brought it up again. But Harry has a daughter named Brianna. She is 33 years old. A few years ago, Brianna went to nursing school. She became a nurse. I find that almost unbearably beautiful and almost unbearably painful. She became the exact thing I gave up. We don't talk about the connection, but I cried alone in my room the day she graduated. I watched her walk across that stage, and I mourned the girl I was in 1953. Harry also has a son, Devin, who is 29 and studying sociology out in Seattle. He barely knows me. He sends me a card on my birthday, and that is about it. Denise's children are different. She has a son, Marcus Jr., who goes by MJ. He is 38, a high school football coach. He is respectful and warm, but very busy with his own life. He calls on holidays, and I don't blame him for being busy. But then there is my granddaughter, Janelle. She is 41, a graphic designer. Janelle is my favorite grandchild, though I would never say that out loud to the others. She is bold. She has tattoos all over her arms, and she is completely, wonderfully unbothered by what anyone thinks of her. When I watch Janelle live her life, when I hear her loud laugh, I feel a sharp pang of envy. But mostly I feel a profound relief. The curse stopped with her. And then there is my great-granddaughter, Aisha. She is only 14 years old. She is Janelle's daughter. Aisha comes over to my house every other Saturday. We sit on the couch together and we watch old black and white movies on the television. I tell her things I have never told another living soul. I talk to her about Ruth. I talk to her about the scholarship. Aisha just listens. She doesn't try to fix it. She doesn't give me advice like her grandmother Denise does. I honestly think that 14-year-old girl might be the most emotionally intelligent person I have ever known. MJ has a son too, named Zion. He is 11. He is loud, energetic, and completely chaotic. When he visits, I pretend to be annoyed by the noise. But I am not. I love the noise. My house was silent for too long. Looking at these young women in my family, I see the girl I used to be. At 21, I let the world tell a smart, capable black girl from Alabama exactly how to politely erase herself. I let the pressure of being a respectable churchwoman turn me into a ghost in my own life. I spent 70 years being polite at the expense of my own soul. Please do not let this happen to you. I am talking to you directly now. If you learn anything from my long, painful life, let it be this: stop performing. The world is not going to hand you a trophy at the end of your life for being polite. You do not get extra points in heaven for suffering in silence and letting other people dictate your choices. Nobody is keeping score of how respectable you are. And even if they are, their score sheet does not matter. When you are lying in your bed at the end of your life, the neighbors who judged you are not going to be there to hold your hand. I still wear my mother's pearl earrings every single day. I have worn them since she died in 1979. I still catch myself putting on my nice church clothes just to go out to the pharmacy or the grocery store, because it is an old habit I cannot seem to shake. But here in my home, I rarely wear anything but a house dress and my comfortable slippers. And internally, everything has changed. I do not pretend anymore. I walk slowly now. I use a wooden cane to get around the house. I name the cane Gerald, just to make myself laugh. I say exactly what is on my mind. If I don't want to do something, I say no. I laugh loudly at things that used to absolutely mortify me. Just last year, I sat down with my pastor at Greater Hope. He came over for a visit. I poured him some tea. I looked him in the eye, and I told him the truth. I told him that I did not believe half of the things I used to say I believed. I told him, "Pastor, I spent 40 years saying things in church I didn't mean, just to impress people who weren't paying attention anyway." He sat there with his teacup in his hand, and he didn't know what to do with me. He just blinked. Then he bowed his head and prayed for me. I thank him for the prayer, and for the very first time in my life, I actually meant it. I thanked him because I was finally standing in my own truth, and his prayer was just a kind gesture from a man who didn't understand my freedom. If any part of my story hit close to home for you, pass it on. Share this video with someone who needs it. There is someone you know who is carrying this exact same weight. Someone who is living a made-up, performative life, and they have no one to tell them the plain truth. Be the person who shares the truth with them. And if you want more of these conversations, the real ones, the hard ones, the completely honest ones, subscribe to this channel. Hit the bell so you do not miss the next time we talk. Leave me a comment below. I want you to tell me right now, what is the one thing you wish you had said sooner to someone you love? Do not hold it back. Write it down. I sit here in my house and I read every single one of your comments. They mean the world to me. And if you have a story of your own, one that needs to be told before it is too late, send it to us. There is a link right below this video. Your story matters. Do not take it to the grave. The truth only sets us free when we finally have the courage to say it out loud.